In a season blighted so far by injuries, harsh calls, and probably excessive graft, already slimming the margins more than they were, it makes missing the mark further down the line often brutally punished, disproportionately so. This was the case in Arsenal's 1-0 defeat on Sunday against Newcastle United, every slight imperfection or inefficiency magnified to the extreme. But today's video is not meant to be a positive video. That's never what my content tries to be. But it is a video that is going to attempt to measure the extremities of online discourse and take you through a slightly different type of analysis to my normal post-match reaction, a more play-by-play analysis of the Newcastle game, a match where Arsenal were by no means bad, whatever bad means. But did we miss the mark in terms of balance, both forced and unforced? Did we not focus on what was giving us real joy at times? I think those are fairer critiques. How did the approach shift after the substitutions of Nwaneri, Jorginho, Zinchenko, White, etc.? This is a video that tries to let you guys into my head when I'm watching games back. And I say watching games back with emphasis because I am a fan watching these matches. I vent frustration. I am so desperate for Arsenal to win like we all are. But I've channeled all of this into watching the game back, racking my brains. So stick with me today, guys. I think this is an important video to watch. The result may be damaging, but Arsenal are by no means a catastrophe. There is a lot to get behind. I'm going to start with Arsenal's intentions in the game because they were clear right from the off. This was our nominal shape that we tried to form. Partey inverting alongside Declan Rice, Merino floating higher up to compete for second balls, Havertz, who is off screen, drifting wider to connect play with Saka on the right hand side, Trossard floating in the central pockets, and the wingers high and wide. This is another view of the same shape slightly later in the game. Raya splitting the centre backs, Havertz has become that right link, forming a kind of box shape with Merino, but that's not important because back to the opening 25 seconds, that shot I showed at the start of the game. This is what I'm talking about when I say we created some really good situations at times, but often the balance of the side got in the way of forming these more often. This is what I mean. Here, Havertz leaves his role of Saka support, and it looks like he and Trossard at the start of the game are going to return to a much more balanced, fluid relationship. Things are dynamic, deeper too. Partey becomes the deepest midfielder. Merino is still higher, and Havertz actually floats into this midfield three, with Trossard pulling to the right and being that combination or link man with Saka. This allows Kai Havertz to be a runner through the middle. He goes then for a 1-2 with Bukayo Saka as our attack speeds up. It doesn't quite come off, and that's a theme. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4 runners stampeding on this Newcastle goal. A fluid build-up, and the fluid build-up that we've come to know with this Arsenal side in recent weeks, creates more of these dynamic situations higher up. But one of the big things we missed in our fluid 4-2-4 or 4-2-2, whatever you want to call that foundation, is that thrust from our fullbacks with the right-footed Timber at left back on the day, Calafiori out of course, and Partey at right back instead of Timber or Ben White. Those pushing forces from fullback that when we are talking about how Kai Havertz has seemingly increasingly drifted wider and wider and closer to Saka in recent weeks, Timber or White would provide that pushing force to allow Havertz at times to be more central and not having the problems that we showed on Sunday against Newcastle, with Trossard seemingly at times being our only central connector in a more of a false nine between the lines. And we weren't making, as a result, the most of these types of spaces we could manipulate against Newcastle. As always, there is a middle ground. Personnel can dictate approach to an extent, but I think with this type of shape that I'm showing on screen, we were a bit too rigid with the player roles within this. I hope that sort of makes sense, this middle ground. Havertz, of course, is needed closer to the centre, but the debate is more nuanced, and without these pushing forces from the flanks, without a Odegaard or a Nwaneri, as we'll get on to, in that sort of more support staff right-hand side channel role, Havertz is having to play this more functional role at the moment. But maybe as I hope I've shown, maybe still one he's playing and he's doing more than he should. Because we create moments like this with Timber driving into the pocket that Merino creates. And just imagine here, Havertz ghosting off the shoulder in behind, stretching, creating room to isolate Saka for a potential 1v1. Trossard moving off of him deeper into the pockets, that pendulum pivoting, hinging motion that we've spoken about a lot on the channel. And with Calafiori or White or Timber on the right-hand side, it just means Havertz wouldn't always have to be this essential right-back option at times in possession. We often stack our pivots like this, trying to stretch an opposition press wide to create these dynamic situations out wide with those fullbacks that I've just mentioned. That's the benefit of having these pushers from the flanks, this fluid build-up that creates dynamic situations further up the pitch. And I think, again, maybe a fairer critique of the Newcastle games were there still were times that we created situations similar to this. This is the benefit. Here we see a very Calafiori-esque left-hand side look. Stacking our pivots, Timber high and wide at left-back, Martinelli actually pushed inside, and we now form what is a flat back four, with Partey and Rice dropping together, Partey then hurrying it through the lines to Merino, who has the space in the pocket now to show that intuitive, economical play of his, with Timber as an outside threat and Martinelli instantly dashing in behind. This is an example of balanced movements. And to be probably hypercritical of Martinelli, he could probably carry it further and make more of an opportunity of this. These types of in and out movements really help exploit the central spaces Newcastle can leave, because they have centre-backs uncomfortable in following these false 90 type movements deeper. And here we have Trossard, and we give Trossard space, and he doesn't, in this scenario, look lost in these central pockets, having to connect everything and do it all as he had to at times on Sunday. Here he actually has 3 or 4 runners beyond him, but this became a theme of the day, and it was mishit passes, mistimed passes, often not making most of the situations we did managed to fashion. Maybe this is another one. For example, I like the throwback here to the left back runs we saw last season. Merino coming low, Trossard drawing the centre backs higher, Timber darting in behind, making that Newcastle line play at different heights, giving Saka an opportunity. Or here, when we're talking about maybe the all too rigid roles that players play, this was a rare occasion where Kai Havertz allowed himself to stray more central. Here, he connects play from deep and then makes that ghosting run from deep in behind. This is an example of Martinelli as well, showing how he has improved on how he can open up angles from the touchline that we've spoken about post Southampton and Spurs matches. Here, he finds Kai Havertz, who stands up across to Saka. It's another moment, it's another situation created. But to do a brief aside on Gabriel Martinelli, I thought he had a really good game yesterday. Despite the discussion online, I don't think it's the right game to criticise Martinelli for, especially considering that without Calafiori and Timber, who we all know, his tendencies make him do the best work and makes Timber the best player when he's on the inside, in the inside pockets. Martinelli, as a result, had a much more touchline huggy role than he stylistically suits. What I would say, though, is that I wonder if Martinelli could be, even from wide, a bit more like Martinelli. What I mean by this is making those darts off the shoulder more constantly to provide that stretching force to unsettle the Newcastle backline in these types of situations here, even if it's just a decoy, because it was ultimately a game of moments, and that's often what you expect at St James's Park. It's what happened to Manchester City, for example, on their trip to Tyneside. And Newcastle are a side in games like this that hurt you in one way. That's playing fast and through you. They didn't create too much as well against us, but if they were going to hurt you, they do so like this. Let me explain. Here, there are lots of rotations and fluidity on that Newcastle left-hand side, with Bruno Guimaraes dropping deep. Normally he would be shadowed in our pressing structure by Declan Rice, but here Rice is forced to stay lower on Joe Willock, who is rotated inside from the touchline. Joel Linton is pinning Thomas Partey out wide, who can't step through. Longstaff then adds to the overload by drifting left, and it's, let's be honest, it's brilliant vertical combination play. That's Newcastle. It does happen sometimes. Good teams with good qualities are allowed to cause you harm. This was their way, their only way of hurting us in the first half, often happy to create these chaotic second ball situations in and around our own box in which they actually often outdueled us. But that also got me thinking about our own moments of winning our own knockdowns and those pinball-y situations in their half, and how, again, a more central Havertz, and we've spoken again about the nuances to this debate, would secure a lot more of these wins. Someone who is so smart in moving about like a false nine, but the body of a real true centre forward, in and out of pockets as well as stretching a back line. Some of our best moments in the game and best moments came in winning very similar moments like this, but not being as decisive. So it's something for you guys and all of us to think about. Let's move on to the second half though. Trossard and Havertz were sharing the load much more now of playing that more functional right-hand sided role, and combine this though with a team chasing the game, pinning Newcastle deeper, who I think it's fair to say were losing steam somewhat in terms of an attacking threat. It was a matter of time before we shifted from the foundation I've been previously talking about to a more final third heavy setup. Not so much bent on creating dynamic attacks, but sitting and breaking. And this meant that it was only a matter of time before Ethan Nwaneri came on. And he came on alongside Zinchenko around the hour mark, and we formed this more staggered midfield setup, very similar to the dynamics we saw against Wolves on the opening day of the season, with Zinchenko positioning himself outside the block, dominating our touches, Partey almost positioned as an interior to accelerate play, and Nwaneri higher in the right pocket, but able to be that connecting presence, displacing Havertz's first half job, who would move central. And Nwaneri's first involvement was dropping lower and drawing a foul. It was a sign of the personality and the confidence Ethan always shows on the ball. We had probably 20 to 25 minutes of trying to break this super compact Newcastle defence, but we created spaces, and I go back to what I've said as a bit of a theme in this video. We just didn't exploit them, I think. We missed the mark in terms of exploiting them to the best of our ability. Nwaneri here demonstrated that constant shifting between spaces, the same constant shifting and movements that make Ødegaard so good in and out of the pockets. And if you remember my scouting report on Nwaneri, the thing that sets him apart as a talent more broadly is his range of motion, his motor. Partey here finds that between the lines pass once again. Nwaneri takes it and drives. And here comes a very niche memory, but I know you allow it. It reminded me of, as Nwaneri here drifts and overloads the left-hand side, it reminds me of the assist he had for Gabriel Jesus in pre-season against Manchester United. Unfortunately, Zinchenko doesn't see that slipped ball in behind, and there were lots of just these nearly moments for us in the second half. Saka standing up across just over Kai Havertz's head, or Nwaneri here staying higher to provide that space deeper for Jurrien, who is normally so accurate in picking passes from these zones. But here, as White adds that velocity and run from deep in a right-hand side that started to look very much like our away performance against Aston Villa in terms of the dynamics, Jurrien overhits the pass, uncharacteristically so. And of course, there was that Rice header that just went wide from that Saka wonder cross. It was a day where we just missed the mark. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and one that we have to swallow. Nothing more, nothing less. And of course, there is a middle ground to this, as we've discussed, but it was not an atrocious performance. I think it's another difficult context and situation that you had against going down to 10 men against Manchester City, against a Brighton team, against a Bournemouth team that, as an 11-men Manchester City side, found out this weekend, are notorious banana skin situations. These are the fixtures that the robots or the computer does not always win. And it's a fixture where, especially when we're talking about team balance, in particular fixing roles for players that they do not quite fit into, whether that was forced or in some cases unforced. These are the slight inefficiencies, and ever so slight inefficiencies, that are laid bare when you're already in a position that we find ourselves in now, 5 points off Manchester City and a couple more off Liverpool. Missing the mark is punished often disproportionately so. I'll end in a similar vein to last video though. This Arsenal team has so much potential this season, and if you've watched as closely enough, or hopefully if you trust my word somewhat, you will trust yourself not to fall into real extreme discourses and discussions. And you'll also know, especially if you've watched any of Manchester City this season, that we find ourselves in a harsh, I don't want to say unfair because it's not going to change the fact that we are where we are, but we are in a position in the table that could very easily be a much different landscape in another realistic world. And as I said last video, it's about staying with the pace until Christmas time, until the new year. That is the key. If we can stay probably within 5 points of City, I give us a real chance. And like I said, there is still so much this season to be so excited for. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with how we are playing. There is nothing faulty with our machine. We haven't chugged to a halt. We need a healthy squad back, yes. We also need to react as quick as possible to maintain, though, that thick skin and also to show our teeth a bit more now. There is work to do. I'm not going to pretend there is not. But let's not ignore that this season has so much in store for us. I'll speak to you guys again very, very shortly. But until next time, I'll catch you in a bit. See you later.